Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, news and analysis of some of this week's top stories at the Reporters Roundtable. The snowstorm is still wreaking havoc on school systems. A former Virginia nurse is accused of hurting babies in her care. Civil rights leaders are calling for justice for the Black man killed in a New York prison and the passing of a DMV veteran journalist. We'll talk about all of those stories and much more tonight. My guests are Curtis Crutchfield, former news director at Prince George's Community Television, and Misha Green, managing editor for the Washington Informer. Thank you both for spending some time with us to take a look at some of these top stories. I appreciate your time.
Thanks.
So,
Yes.
let me ask you this first, Misha. How are you doing in the snow? A lot of people have struggled a little bit because we haven't seen anything like this in 3 years.
Yeah, I was really excited for it until I forgot I was a single woman.
That's another show.
And I had to shovel. But I mean, it was so beautiful to witness the young people really enjoying it. Of course, it was a major work day for me, so no snow days any longer, and particularly because it was the day of the Senate confirmation hearing, as well as Mayor Muriel Bowser's signing the President Biden, and Bowser going to the White House to watch the president sign the RFK Stadium bill. So it was a really big day for us here in Washington, D.C. Not only did we get about 7 inches of snow, but there was a lot of history making and news that made us really, really excited, particularly the RFK Stadium bills. So, it's interesting to watch how folks are navigating this snowstorm in particular. Washington, D.C. public schools went to school today, which did not get a lot of love. There are a lot of parents and teachers very concerned about that decision, especially when other jurisdictions were closed. But that said, Mayor Muriel Bowser is trying to get folks back to work and really get downtown open. And I think there's been some understanding among teachers from what I'm seeing on the Xaverse. We used to call that the Twitterverse. I'm just excited to see the white stuff on the ground and acting to it in mostly positive ways. I will say this before I wrap, which is that I learned that there's a lot of work to save the environment around snow treatment. So the salt, I didn't realize, was so bad for the streets. And so in the Washington Informer, as we covered the big annual snowball fight, not at the Capitol this year, but at, I'm a Washingtonian, Malcolm X Park,
Right.
Hill. And people were really excited when they learned that the district has been really intentional about treating the streets in an environmentally friendly way with a beet juice and a brine that is a little bit more climate friendly. I think that is really good because we haven't seen snow due to climate change. So anyway, as we're treating our personal spaces, let's remember to also keep the environment safe.
How are your streets in Prince George's, Curtis? Did you have any issues?
I haven't been out here. Today is my day of rest. Last 2 days I was shoveling. I spent a couple hours outdoors shoveling. Now in Prince George's, where I live, you have 48 hours to clear your sidewalks after a major storm. I think in DC it's 8 hours. It's different depending on where you live. So I think in Montgomery County it's the same. So with regard to climate change, I was happily seeing the snow. I love snow. I love it, other than having to shovel it. The kids love it, sleigh riding, snowball fights, that sort of thing. But with regard to climate change, I think Maryland, I'm not sure about where exactly, but at least the state transportation department has been using that brine solution on state highways. I think Prince George's may use it as well. Now, whether this is going across the state, I'm not sure, but at least there is some environmental friendly solutions to street maintenance, snow removal, that sort of thing.
Well, I would also say that it appears, although you can't make everyone happy, but DC did not have any major issues. In speaking with Delano Hunter yesterday, the director of the DC Department of the General Services Administration, that he, along with working with the Department of Transportation and the DC Department of Public Works, that they did a good job. Now, certainly this was not snowmageddon snow that we had seen in years past, but the thing that has been problematic for everyone is that we not only got 2 rounds of snow, but it was also wrapped in bitterly cold temperatures. And we've seen across the country, and even on the other side of the Beltway, how problematic this has been. And so DC fared very well. The mayor has said that it was important, since we hadn't had this kind of snow in quite some time, that the city workers were not rusty when it came to dealing with this. And so certainly this was the first one of this season and the first one in 3 years, but there could very well be more this weekend, and we are right smack dab in the middle of winter anyway. So we still have some time to see if the metal that has been tested continues to hold up.
Well, you have to give kudos to the public works crews around the region, Maryland, DC, and Virginia. That's hard work.
Yes, indeed.
Clearing streets, sidewalks. In Maryland and Prince George's particularly, there are about 120 some schools. Now, schools have been closed, all this week. Now, there are a lot of school parking lots to be cleaned, and roads leading up to these schools have to be cleaned. That's a lot of work. So I think the school district officials made a wise choice in making sure that the kids were safe to be able to get to school safely. I assume schools will probably be open tomorrow, perhaps with a 2-hour delay, but it's a lot of work clearing roads, parking lots, and sidewalks. So you have to give kudos to public works officials across the region. I'm sure there are some neighborhood bad spots here and there, but it's hard work.
Yeah,
it really is. I do want to move on to another story. This is a really shocking story. 26-year-old NICU nurse Erin Elizabeth Ann Stropman at the Henrico County Doctors Hospital, or I should say Henrico Doctors Hospital in Henrico County. She is accused of child abuse and other charges. Some people have called it a racist attack, where she has broken the bones of the most vulnerable newborns in the neonatal intensive care unit. It's really difficult to talk about this, Misha. This is really heartbreaking. It's frightening, because she had been suspected 2 years ago in 2023 and had been put on leave for a year before she was brought back. And before we even go into it, one of the fathers of the children had this to say.
They failed. Strictly, they failed on multiple different levels with multiple different families, and they need to be held accountable as well, because that shouldn't have happened. If they were suspicious of some person enough to let them go, they shouldn't have brought them back.
That again is a really heartbreaking story. Misha, your thoughts about this?
It is heartbreaking. It's infuriating. It's terrifying to think that healthcare workers And again, these are the most vulnerable patients. NICU, there's nothing that can be said to justify this or to sugarcoat the fact that this woman needs to be under the jail. I am horrified that they even brought her back when there was a suspicion because of the severity of the accusations. You know, and I'm not positive which dad that was, but I read an article, and it was this father, his last name was Hackey, who talked about the fact that he was afraid to hold one of his twins, learning of their broken leg, because he thought he might have something to do with the injury of one of his twins who happened to be in the NICU and was born 28 weeks. And in fact, this was the healthier of the twins whose leg ended up broken. And so, you know, the amount of guilt that these families carried, not only because they didn't know what had happened to their infants for so long, but then, you know, thinking about, well, why was my child here, you know, and how could I have missed these signs? And if only I were there 24/7, those kinds of feelings that now they're carrying, even when they have someone to blame, it is really, really heartbreaking. One thing that I wasn't clear about in some of the reporting is why they were able to bring her back, why the investigation allowed her to come back into the facility. But I would be interested in looking at the hospital as well, and seeing how we can avoid these things in the healthcare system overall.
Yeah, no question. And let me, before I have you comment real quick, Curtis, this is the same county where a man, Ervo Otieno, died in the custody of Henrico County Sheriff's deputies. This was back in 2023.
Right.
So it makes you wonder what's going on in Henrico County, Curtis.
The nurse, my understanding, she's been charged with one case. However, there were at least 6 or 7 other cases dating back in the last year or so. Now, is she allegedly involved in all of these? What is the hospital administration doing? Who's to blame there? If there's one instance, one child being hurt, something has to change. Whether there's video camera surveillance, whether people are taken off the job, whether there's in terms of protocol, at least 3 nurses or a supervisor has to be in the unit at all time to observe others, that sort of thing. I'm wondering what the hospital system has done, whether or not the hospital administrator or administrators should be held accountable as well. So it's not just the nurse, the administration as well. They're at fault, absolutely.
Yeah. Before we go to break, we'll talk more about this on the other side. I did want to just extend, condolences to the family, to the friends, and to our colleagues over at NBC4. Reporter Derek Ward passed away yesterday at the age of 62 from complications of a cardiac arrest. Derek was a great journalist. He was well known. He spent a little bit of time at WHUR, also at WPFW, at WAMU, also at WTOP. When we come back, I definitely want to hear from both of you about Derek Ward, what he meant to us as a colleague, but also to the news community and the greater community. So please stay with us. We are going to take a break, but don't forget you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our analysis of some of the top stories of the week at the Reporters Roundtable. My guests are Misha Green, managing editor for the Washington Informer, and Curtis Crutchfield, former news director at Prince George's Community Television. Before the break, we were talking about our friend and colleague, Derek Ward, a reporter for NBC4, the NBC affiliate WRC-TV, here in Washington, D.C., a longtime journalist, TV reporter, radio reporter. Curtis, you've known Derek from, as we say, back in the day.
I had the pleasure of meeting Derek at a community forum years and years ago. It was probably in the early 90s, I'm not sure. We were interacting with community leaders who wanted to get insight in terms of how you access the news media. How do you get stories across? And my impression of him, just a fine gentleman, a person with the community at heart. And we should know, you know this as well, he's a native Washingtonian. And it says something that if you have a native Washingtonian who lives here, works here, reporting on the community that he grew up loving and knowing. So, you know, as an African-American male, having his presence on TV, knowing he's a native Washingtonian, I think to a lot of people that probably meant something, because you could say rightly, he's one of us.
Absolutely. Misha, you also knew Derek, you saw him.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Well, you know, I remember the first time seeing Derek Ward in person when I was new to the scene as a journalist, because I grew up watching him and listening to him and really appreciating his just beautiful and sort of relatable style of reporting. It wasn't only reliable journalism, but again, that native Washingtonian thing was so prominent. You could tell he cared about the community. And so this is such a devastating loss for the journalism world as well as Washington, D.C. at large. One thing that I want to uplift that so many people have talked about since his passing, which is just how kind of a person Derek Ward was. He was so incredibly nice, so genuine, and really cared about every story in such a way that it wasn't, obviously it was very clear to our readers, to his viewers, but also to those who really learned under him, like myself. And so I really am very sad to see Derek Ward gone too soon. It feels so incredibly sudden. But I just really hope that wherever he is up there smiling down on us, that he sees the way Washington, D.C. has poured so much love to him, and that his family feels the love, because people are not only heartbroken, but really working to uplift his legacy.
Well, you know, speaking of his legacy, and I met Derek on several occasions, but the thing that really stood out to me, and it says something more about modern journalism, that he was able to still tell stories. That's very difficult in this day and age of the running and gunning news coverage that we see in television, radio, and in some cases, no shade, in newspapers. You know, and Derek was still able to tell a story, even if it was and this may be kind of an oxymoron, your run-of-the-mill crime story, because crime was so common, and yet he was able to find a story to tell. And even those stories which were not difficult and heartbreaking, but just about the communities, even if it was about how fans are feeling about the Commanders or something like that, he was still able to touch us all. And so Derek will certainly be missed. Another person who will definitely be missed is Jimmy Carter, the 39th president of the United States. He is currently lying in state at the Capitol Rotunda. He passed away last week at 100 years old. And yesterday, during the Capitol memorial for him, we heard from Vice President Kamala Harris.
He served the people, and he left the world better than he found it. And in the end, Jimmy Carter's work and those works speak for him, louder than any tribute we can offer. May his life be a lesson for the ages and a beacon for the future.
Curtis, Jimmy Carter was, he became, president post Watergate era after, Gerald Ford. You and I are not old enough to have been working at the time, but we are old enough to remember the impact that he had on this nation. He was a different kind of guy.
I remember a bit about the Carter administration. I was still in college when he was elected, and I think my perspective was that here comes, I think perhaps the public perception about him was that he was a good government type. His administration, in terms of accomplishments, wasn't that well acknowledged at the time, because I think we were going through an economic downturn at that time. He wasn't the rah-rah type. He wasn't the type that would regale you at political events, that sort of thing. I think he was more or less a nuts and bolts politician. He was credited with creating the Department of Energy, I believe FEMA. The remarks from Vice President Kamala Harris yesterday alluded to that. To me, I don't know whether she was taking a swipe at the incoming administration, but
what would ever make you say that?
But anyway, his character, his life, his work as president and post-presidential work, it's a big contrast between him, Carter, and the incoming administration, and I think that's clear. He was a beloved politician, and I think the history books, as people heard yesterday, and Harris's remarks and those of others, I think the history books will applaud him as perhaps one of the best presidents, including his presidency and post-presidential work. Won a Nobel Prize, I believe, for helping to shepherd the Egyptian-Israeli peace accords. His work with Habitat for Humanity, just a humble guy, taught at his church, Sunday school teacher. So people loved him. And whether you liked his politics or not, I think people genuinely liked him.
Yeah. Misha, your thoughts about Jimmy Carter?
So one thing that I really appreciated about President Carter is that not only his legacy as a president, but that he's a really good man. He was very, very interested in peace for the nation and world, and helping people no matter where they came from or background. And hearing so many people share their thoughts about the former president, based off of the man that he was, has brought so much joy, even as the country mourns his loss. So hearing Ambassador Andrew Young talk about their first meeting and him being a little leery meeting this white man, you know, in the late 1960s, and then of course them really having a great political relationship as well as friendship. And that whole Georgia connection, if y'all know folks from Georgia, they don't play. And so, you know, I think that was really, really beautiful to hear. Obviously, the vice president remembering him, but us getting a reminder of President Carter's dedication to the nation just by him saying, hey, I don't plan on going anywhere until I can cast a ballot for Kamala Harris. Here in the district, he was not only committed to his work at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, but he attended the First Baptist Church of Washington, D.C., right across the street from the White House, and taught Sunday school, adult Sunday school classes there. He was insistent on his daughter going to a D.C. public school. He was really a leader in appointing African Americans to major roles within his cabinet. There's so much that we can look at President Carter's career and say, thank you for really being a guiding light in so many ways to how this nation has continued to progress. And so, you know, Curtis, I think we can confidently say that the vice president was taking a swipe at the incoming administration. But I think that's because we need the reminder of, like, you know, we're not talking about politics as much as we're talking about caring for humanity when we talk about President Carter's legacy. And I think that that's a major reminder for all of us, not just the incoming administration.
I will say also, and I think Curtis really touched on it, because when Jimmy Carter was president, when he was, you know, elected, I was very, very young, but was still extremely aware. He was not the first president. He was the third president that I remember as a very, very young person, the first being Richard Nixon. But the thing that I find, of course, I remember the ill-fated attempt to rescue the hostages in Iran. That certainly was problematic. Then there was as you mentioned, Curtis, the peace accord with Anwar Sadat of Egypt and Menachem Begin of Israel. And the horrific thing, it was not long after that Anwar Sadat was assassinated. But the thing that, if you want to look at a comparison between what some would say a gentler time, was when he did that interview with Playboy magazine, and he made that comment where he says, I've looked on a lot of women with lust. I've committed adultery in my heart many times. And the controversy surrounding that comment back in 1977, it was outrageous. And yet we look at, the kind of controversies that we've had regarding infidelity with presidents, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, etc. And it's almost a shrug now. And it just suggests, I think, to me, Curtis, just how things have changed.
And one wonders how much more things will change in the next 4 years. We've seen this rodeo before, and will it be Donald Trump 2.0? Will it be Donald Trump on steroids? Who knows? There's the Project 2025 initiative that the Heritage Foundation and many of the Trump supporters have put together. They've talked about eliminating the education department, downsizing the federal government, and I think the obvious attempt is to get more of his supporters entrenched into the federal government system. So we will see.
Well, speaking of rodeos,
we have a massive deficit with Mexico, and we help Mexico a lot. They're essentially run by the cartels, and can't let that happen. Mexico's really in trouble, a lot of trouble. Very dangerous place. And we're going to be announcing at a future date pretty soon. We're going to change, because we do most of the work there and it's ours. We're going to be changing, sort of the opposite of Biden, where he's closing everything up, essentially getting rid of $50 to $60 trillion worth of assets. We're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which has a beautiful ring that covers a lot of territory. The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name.
Like I said, Misha, giddy up, buckle up. There is a taste of Trump 2.0.
Yes, and so it begins. I think, other than just the absurdity of the entire statement and this thought of changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which he says twice, sounds beautiful, is that it concerns me that Trump is still in campaign mode. Did you hear him comparing himself to the current president, who he hasn't been in competition with since July? And so that, while we know the challenges that Donald Trump already sort of comes with, for particularly my wheelhouse at the Washington Informer for people of color, is that we're also looking at somebody who is not really progress oriented in general about this nation. He's still talking about topics that he was trying to address in 2016 to 2020 or 2017 to 21, depending on how you do the math. I thought mentioning President Biden was just pointless in that speech, specifically because, again, we're talking about progress and moving forward and a new administration under a new party, etc. And so that's also concerning to me. But as you said, buckle up. I think for me, what I'm really hoping that we can keep a pulse on is everything that has been stated in Project 2025 as a plan, and hope that we're holding the president accountable in saying this, why are you planning to do this? And this is how it could be detrimental to the American people.
Curtis, real quick, do you think a lot of the analysis over the past several days has been, what has Donald Trump learned or not learned that he will bring into his new administration when he is inaugurated on January 20th? But my question to you is, do you believe that journalists will bring a different bent to their coverage? Do you believe that they will ask harder questions, will have a stiffer spine? They know who they're dealing with now, as opposed to having a really steep learning curve in 2016.
I certainly hope so. Any journalist worth his or her salt would definitely do that. Now, today's White House correspondents, I don't know whether they'll see that beat as a plum assignment. Trump, during his first term, he had a lot of problems with journalists, the way they covered him. If he didn't like a question or an angle to a question that was raised, he would single them out. April Ryan, a well-renowned reporter, had her issues. African-American, a respected journalist for years and years. She had her issues with Trump. There were others. Jim Acosta, who I think at the time was with CNN, not sure.
CNN still is.
Yes, he had problems with Trump. He singled them out. So I expect more of the same. The announcement in recent days from Meta that it would stop its fact-checking mechanism service. I think that's a sign of the Trump times. So getting clear and accurate information in the days of this decade, if you will, of misinformation, it's going to be harder and harder for the everyday person. Perhaps it's best to stay off of social media and just follow those respected, long-standing news organizations that have been known for objective journalism.
Yeah.
Be it the Associated Press, be it whomever. Some of the alternative media out there, Democracy Now, NPR, so on and so forth. So it's best, in my view, for people to. I'm reminded of a quote from the late Maryland Congressman Elijah Cummings. He's been gone from us some time ago. I'm not sure of the exact time frame, but quote, he said, "Pay attention. Pay attention to what's going on in your government. Pay attention to what your elected officials are doing. Be informed. Be aware." So I think I would say that to everyone in general with this new administration. Read, listen, watch, and learn. And as was said, we're going to have to hold people accountable.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of holding people accountable, we have a really difficult story coming out of New York. 43-year-old Robert Brooks, an inmate at the Marcy Correctional Facility in New York, was beaten to death back in December on the 10th by correctional officers. And there has been an investigation that has been launched by New York Attorney General Letitia James. She has since recused herself from this case and has announced that there will be a special prosecutor involved here. There is difficult video that has been released, a body cam video that has been released. We can't show it here because you can't hear it. There's no audio. And so you wouldn't be able to hear anything. But what you can see is really, it is horrific. Hit in the stomach, hit in the face, hit with a shoe, held up by his neck and dropped, keeping in mind that all of these things are happening, Misha, while he is handcuffed behind his back. These correctional officers in the video are white. He is black. Civil rights leaders are calling for action. Just your thoughts about this briefly.
Well, I think this is despicable. I'm happy that civil rights leaders are really taking a stance and making sure that Robert Brooks' name is remembered. But also, I'm very disappointed in everything about this police department and how they handled it. Two of those officers,
and these are correctional officers.
Excuse me, two of these correctional officers had been in trouble previously for their work. As you see, every single one of those white officers, when looking at the video, take turns. This was something that they had planned to do. He is handcuffed, as Harold mentioned, and then they put something in his mouth before they even get started in this extreme abuse, obviously excessive use of force. And again, I've read a couple of articles on this, and I'm scratching my head because several folks say because there's no audio that it's not clear how this situation unfolded. But a man handcuffed with something in his mouth tells me that he was not a threat. He absolutely did not deserve that excessive use of force. And I really, really hope that it not only civil rights leaders stand up, but that we all really remember that there is a lot of work to do in the freedom fight, in the fight for equity, in the fight for treating folks as they should be treated.
Yeah. Curtis, real quick, your thoughts about this?
There have been other deaths. I read this morning that there have been other deaths in the New York state prison system. Going back the last 4 or 5 years, almost 100 deaths a year. Now, whether they were on this level, whether they were caused by correctional officers or not, that's a lot. Whether it was inmate or an inmate violence or a correctional officer or an inmate violence, that sort of thing, but that's a lot. I'm a little concerned that Letitia James asked for a special prosecutor because her office has a special unit to investigate cases of police abuse, law enforcement abuse. Now, did she make a political choice to separate this case, to take her out of it? Hopefully the state system there will see this process through and the guards are held accountable. I believe it's unlikely that the new federal Justice Department will do anything. If anything is going to happen, if there's any accountability, it's going to have to be at the state level.
Right.
Yeah, without a doubt. Real quick, I only have a minute left. Misha, your thoughts about McDonald's dropping or modifying its DEI strategies? Real quick, your thoughts about that?
We saw it coming. This has been in the works since really affirmative action was dropped in June 2023. And so it's horrifying, but we've seen other major companies do it, Walmart. So it's a problem, but get ready for more. Again, like you said, buckle up. Curtis,
10 seconds, your thoughts about that?
I would say this to parents: make sure your children are prepared, college and career ready. They're not going to get any assistance, period. So parents, you have to make sure your children are ready to succeed, ready for success.
Indeed. Interesting point. I guess this is really going to give a new definition to a Happy Meal. So we will definitely keep an eye on that. Curtis Crutchfield, Misha Green, thank you both so much for your input at the Reporters Roundtable. That is the Daily Drum for this Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. I'm Harold Fisher.